Don't leave yet. Then I know there are moments when your heart gets tired before your life even changes. Moments when you look at everything you have been carrying, everything you have been waiting for, everything you have been trying to understand, and you quietly tell yourself, maybe it's time to walk away. But before you do that, before you close that door, before you decide that this chapter is over, I need you to hear something. Sometimes the moment you are ready to give up is not the moment your story is ending. Sometimes it is the moment your heart is asking you to stay long enough to understand why you started in the first place. Benja, I'm talking to the person who has been strong for too long. The person who smiles in front of people but goes silent when they are alone. The person who keeps saying, I'm fine, because explaining the truth feels exhausting. Maybe you have loved someone who did not know how deeply you loved them. Maybe you have waited for a message that never came, an apology that never arrived, or a change that seemed like it would never happen. Maybe you have given chance after chance until you started wondering whether giving another chance meant losing yourself. And I want you to know something tonight. Being tired does not mean you are weak. Being disappointed does not mean you failed. And wanting peace does not mean you stopped caring. There is a difference between leaving because something is truly finished and leaving because you are exhausted from waiting for it to become what you hoped it could be. That difference matters because sometimes we make permanent decisions while standing inside temporary pain. We look at one difficult season and assume the entire story will always feel this way. We take one person's silence and turn it into a statement about our worth. We take one rejection and decide that nobody will ever choose us. We take one heartbreak and build a wall so high that even the love we have been praying for cannot reach us. But listen carefully. Your pain is real, but it is not always a prophecy. Chilan, you may be standing in a season where nothing seems to make sense. You may be wondering why the person you wanted did not stay, why the relationship you believed in became complicated, why someone could promise you forever and then suddenly behave like you were never part of their future. And perhaps the hardest part is not even losing them. Perhaps the hardest part is losing the version of yourself that believed everything was going to work out. I understand that kind of silence, the kind where you don't cry anymore because you have cried too much, the kind where you stop checking your phone because you already know there will be nothing there, the kind where you tell yourself you have moved on, but one song, one place, one memory can still take you back to the exact moment when everything felt different. But what if you are not supposed to go back to that moment? What if you are supposed to grow beyond it? What if you are supposed to grow beyond it? Because healing is not about becoming the person you were before the heartbreak. Healing is becoming someone who understands what the heartbreak was trying to teach you. You learn that love is not supposed to make you constantly question whether you matter. You learn that communication matters. Consistency matters, respect matters, effort matters. You learn that somebody can have feelings for you and still not have the maturity to love you properly. And that truth hurts, but it can also set you free. There will be moments when you miss someone who is not good for you. There will be nights when your heart remembers the beautiful moments and conveniently forgets the reasons you were hurting. That is human. Your heart does not keep memories in perfect order. It highlights the laughter and sometimes hides the tears. It remembers the beginning and forgets the nights you begged for the bare minimum. That is why you cannot make every decision based on what you miss. Sometimes you have to make decisions based on what you know, and what you know today may be very different from what you knew yesterday. Maybe yesterday you believed love meant holding on no matter what. Today you understand that love also requires boundaries. Maybe yesterday you thought patience meant waiting forever. Today you understand that patience does not mean abandoning yourself. Maybe yesterday you believed that if you loved someone enough, you could convince them to choose you. Today you understand that real love cannot be forced, and that realization can hurt deeply. Because sometimes the hardest goodbye is not goodbye to a person. It is goodbye to the future you imagined with that person. You had already pictured the conversations, the home, the ordinary mornings, the little routines, the family dinners, the vacations, the life you thought would eventually become yours. And when that future disappears, you don't just lose a relationship, you lose a dream, but dreams can change without your life becoming meaningless. Bendis, sometimes life removes a person because they were part of your journey, not your destination. Sometimes someone enters your life to awaken something in you, to teach you something, to reveal something about your heart, and then their chapter ends. It does not mean the chapter was worthless. It means it had a purpose. Dombillion. And I want you to stop measuring the value of a relationship only by whether it lasted forever. Some people were only meant to stay for a season, but the lesson they left behind stays for a lifetime. Lance, maybe that person taught you what you deserve. Maybe they taught you what you will never accept again. Maybe they showed you how deeply you can love. Maybe they exposed wounds you never knew existed. Maybe they forced you to finally look at yourself and ask, why was I willing to accept so little? I mean that those questions are painful, but they are powerful. Landis. Because one day you will realize that the biggest transformation was not that someone finally came back. The biggest transformation was that you finally came back to yourself, and that is where your story begins to change. Then you stop chasing people who keep walking away. You stop begging for explanations from people who have already shown you their answer through their actions. You stop trying to prove that you are worthy of love. You stop shrinking yourself so someone else feels comfortable staying. You stop confusing attention with affection and chemistry with commitment. So, you begin to understand that the right person will not require you to destroy your peace just to keep the relationship alive. And no, that does not mean the right relationship will never have problems. It will. Real love is not perfect. Two people can love each other deeply and still misunderstand each other. They can argue, they can get tired, they can disagree, they can hurt each other unintentionally. But there is something different about a relationship where both people are willing to repair what they break. Manda, the difference is not the absence of problems. The difference is the presence of effort. Mand dust is magnet. The person who truly values you may not always know exactly what to say, but they will care enough to learn. They may make mistakes, but they will not make excuses forever. They may need space, but they will not use distance as a weapon. They may disagree with you, but they will not make you feel worthless for having feelings. Prombidi and debandianness, because love is not just what somebody says when everything is beautiful. Band love is what they do when things become difficult. And if you are listening to me right now while thinking about someone, wondering whether you should stay, whether you should leave, whether you should reach out one more time, whether you should finally let go, then don't make that decision from panic. Don't make it from loneliness. Don't make it because tonight feels unbearable. Take a breath. Give yourself permission to feel everything without immediately acting on everything. Bien, you don't have to solve your entire life tonight. You don't have to know exactly what happens next. Lanjin, you only need enough courage to take the next honest step. Pandio, because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away. The wisdom is knowing which one is love and which one is fear. And that is something nobody else can decide for you. Demands. But before you leave, before you close your heart completely, before you convince yourself that you will never love again, I want you to remember the person you were before all this happened. Not the perfect version, not the version who had everything figured out. The real version, the person who still believed there was something beautiful waiting ahead, that person is still inside you. The heartbreak did not kill them. The disappointment did not erase them. The waiting did not make them disappear. Headlangers, they are still there, quietly asking you not to give up on yourself just because one chapter did not go the way you wanted. And maybe, just maybe, that is what you needed to hear before you walked away. And maybe, just maybe, that is what you needed to hear before you walked away. Because there are moments in life when we think we are waiting for another person to change, when in reality, life is waiting for us to change the way we see ourselves. We keep looking at the closed door, wondering why someone will not open it, while there may be another door standing behind us that we have been too afraid to notice. And I know that sounds simple, but some of the deepest truths in life are simple. We just don't recognize them when our hearts are hurting. You have spent enough time asking, why didn't they choose me? Maybe now it is time to ask, why did I stop choosing myself? That question can change everything. Because when you stop abandoning yourself for the possibility of being loved by someone else, you begin to understand a kind of love that nobody can take away from you. You begin to realize that your worth was never sitting inside another person's decision. It was never waiting for a text message, a phone call, a proposal, an apology, or a second chance. Your worth existed before they arrived, and it will exist long after they leave. And I know someone listening right now needs to hear this because you have been blaming yourself for things you could not control. You replay conversations in your mind. You wonder if you should have been more patient, more understanding, more attractive, more successful, more available, less emotional, less demanding. You keep rewriting the past as if there is a perfect version of you that could have prevented everything from falling apart. But sometimes things fall apart even when you did everything you knew how to do. Bands, you can love someone sincerely and still lose them. You can communicate honestly and still be misunderstood. Bend, you can give your best and still not be enough for someone who is not ready to receive it. Oh, and none of that automatically means you were the problem. Landis, sometimes people leave because they are fighting battles inside themselves that you cannot fight for them. Sometimes they are afraid of commitment. Sometimes they are carrying wounds they have never faced. Sometimes they don't know how to receive healthy love because chaos is all they have ever known. And sometimes, as painful as it is, they simply don't feel the same way you do. Delineance. That last truth can break your heart, but it can also save your life. Pramgianus. Because you cannot build a future with someone you have to convince to stay in the present. You cannot spend your entire life standing at someone's door, knocking harder and harder, hoping they will suddenly become the person you need. At some point, you have to step back and ask yourself whether you are waiting for love or waiting for permission to stop hurting. Man, there is a difference. Love can require patience, but love should not require the destruction of your dignity. And if someone truly loves you, they will care about what their absence does to you. They will care about your tears. They will care about the uncertainty. They will care about repairing what they damaged. Not because they are perfect, but because losing you matters to them. That is what you should pay attention to. Jen, not promises, patterns, not words, consistency, not what someone says they will do someday, what they repeatedly do today. Bantus, because anyone can say, I love you when emotions are high. Anyone can promise forever during a beautiful moment. But love becomes real in ordinary moments, when the conversation is uncomfortable, when one person is tired, when there is a disagreement, when life becomes stressful, when nobody is watching. That's where character shows itself. And perhaps you have been waiting for someone to become consistent, while ignoring the fact that they have been consistently inconsistent. Bands, you keep saying maybe next time will be different. Maybe. But how many times have you already said that? Land, how many times have you forgiven the same behavior with a different explanation? Banjin, how many times have you accepted a temporary apology because you were afraid of a permanent goodbye? Mans, you deserve a relationship where forgiveness is followed by change, not another opportunity to repeat the same wound. And I want to be careful here because walking away does not always mean you stopped loving someone. Sometimes walking away is the final act of love you give yourself. Sometimes you can love somebody deeply and still recognize that the relationship is not healthy for either of you. Sometimes you can wish someone well without inviting them back into your life. That is maturity. Man, you don't have to hate someone to let them go. You don't have to prove they were evil. You don't have to collect evidence against them. Banded, you don't have to make them the villain in order to become the hero of your own life. Sometimes two people simply become wrong for each other, and accepting that can be more peaceful than spending years trying to find someone to blame. Banjin, but here's the part nobody tells you. Letting go doesn't always feel powerful in the beginning. Sometimes it feels like losing. Sometimes you will wake up and reach for your phone before remembering that there is nobody to text. Sometimes you'll hear their name and feel your chest tighten. Sometimes you'll see a place you visited together and suddenly remember everything. Sometimes you will be doing perfectly fine for weeks and then one random night will bring the memories back. Ben, don't panic when that happens. Healing is not a straight line. You are allowed to have a good day and a difficult night. Manja, you are allowed to miss someone and still know they are not right for you. Bane, you are allowed to love the memories without wanting the relationship back. Land, you are allowed to forgive someone without trusting them again. Or no? And you are allowed to move forward without having every question answered. That last one is important. The incense, because sometimes we delay healing because we are waiting for closure from the person who hurt us. Man, we think if they would just explain why, then I could move on. But what if they never explain? Man, what if they don't have the emotional maturity to give you the answer you deserve? And what if the explanation would not change the outcome anyway? At some point, closure becomes something you give yourself. Danged. You say, I may never understand why they did it, but I understand that I deserve better. And that can be enough. Means you say, I may never get the apology I wanted, but I refuse to let their lack of accountability control the rest of my life. And that can be enough. Pinja. You say, I may always remember what happened, but I will not allow what happened to decide who I become. And that is when healing becomes freedom, because your future should not be punished for the mistakes of your past. Don't punish the person you haven't met yet because of the person who broke your trust before. Don't reject genuine love because someone once gave you something fake. And don't assume everyone will leave because one person did. Then don't close every door because one door slammed in your face. There is still good in this world. Manjan, there are still people who communicate. There are still people who keep their promises. There are still people who believe commitment means something. There are still people who will look at your imperfections and not run. Mincha, there are still people who will not make you beg for basic affection. And one day, when you meet someone like that, you may finally understand why the wrong person had to leave. Not because the pain was necessary in some romantic sense, but because the experience changed your standards. It taught you not to confuse intensity with intimacy. It taught you that butterflies are not always love. Sometimes they're anxiety. It taught you that being wanted for a moment is not the same as being valued consistently. And when healthy love finally enters your life, it may feel strange at first. It may feel too calm, too simple, too peaceful. Because when you have become accustomed to uncertainty, consistency can feel unfamiliar. Then you may even question it. You may wonder, why aren't I worried? Why don't I have to chase? And why don't I have to prove myself? Why does this person actually communicate when something is wrong? And then you realize something beautiful. Peace was never boring. You were simply trained to mistake chaos for passion. Real love does not always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives quietly. It looks like someone remembering the little things you said. Bands, it looks like someone checking on you when they know you're having a difficult day. Bland, it looks like someone listening instead of preparing their defense. It looks like someone saying, I was wrong, without needing to win an argument first. It looks like someone making room for your feelings without making you feel guilty for having them. It looks like two people deciding again and again that the relationship is worth protecting. And when you experience that kind of love, you won't have to wonder whether you matter. You will know. Lands, but until that day comes, don't sit around waiting for somebody else to rescue you from loneliness. Lendia, build a life you don't want to escape from. Become someone you enjoy being alone with. Ban, wake up and give yourself reasons to be proud, work on your dreams, take care of your heart. Learn something new, loth again, go outside, talk to people who make you feel alive. Ban, create memories that have nothing to do with the person you lost, because your life is bigger than one relationship. Mend your identity is bigger than someone's opinion of you. Your future is bigger than your past. And your heart is capable of more than heartbreak. You may not believe that today. That's okay. Baned, you don't have to believe it all at once. Balans, sometimes hope begins as nothing more than a tiny decision to keep going. Just one more morning, one more walk. Jind, one more day without checking their profile. One more night without sending the message you know you will regret. Ban one more decision to choose peace. And eventually, those tiny decisions become a new life. Been to life where you no longer wake up wondering who is going to stay. Been to life where you stop measuring your worth by who chooses you. Live a life where you finally understand that being alone is not the same as being unwanted. And maybe that is the greatest lesson of all. you were never asking for too much. Banja, you were sometimes asking the wrong person. You were never too emotional. Vena, you were giving your heart to someone who did not know how to hold it. You were never impossible to love. Manja, you were simply trying to receive the kind of love from someone who was incapable of giving it. And once you understand that something inside you becomes quiet, the desperation begins to disappear. Ma'am, the need to chase begins to disappear, the fear of being alone begins to disappear, and you start standing differently, and then you start walking differently, you start speaking differently. Not because you became cold, because you became clear. And clarity is powerful. I mean this. So if you are standing at the edge of a decision right now, don't ask only, do I still love them? Dumb D and ask, do I still recognize myself in this relationship? Ambient MBDNO ask, is this love helping me become better, or is it teaching me to accept less? Vangia ask, if nothing changed for the next 5 years, would I still choose this life? That question may scare you. Lanju. But sometimes the question that scares you is the question that finally tells you the truth. And if the answer is that you need to leave, then leave with love. Leave without destroying yourself. Banda, leave without begging them to understand. Leave without turning your heart into stone. And if the answer is that there is still something worth saving, then don't just stay physically. Show up emotionally, have the conversation, tell the truth, listen, take responsibility, change what needs to change. Band, because staying only matters when both people are willing to build something better than what existed before. And maybe that is where your story is going next. Not toward another heartbreak, not toward another lesson, but toward a version of love where you don't have to disappear to keep someone close. A version of love where you can breathe. A version of love where you can be fully yourself. Being a version of love where staying doesn't feel like surviving. And before you make any final decision, remember this. Sometimes the person you are desperately trying not to lose is not the person you are actually afraid of losing. Battered NES. Sometimes you are afraid of losing the dream. Tumbling the dream that one day they will become everything you hoped they would be. Plant the dream that one day they will finally understand. Mince the dream that one day they will wake up and realize what they had. Blaine, but you cannot build your future around someone's potential. You have to build it around their reality. And when you finally accept reality, you don't become heartless. You become free. Lenja, because the moment you stop fighting reality, you can finally start creating your future. And maybe the future you have been afraid to imagine is far more beautiful than the past you have been afraid to release. And maybe the future you have been afraid to imagine is far dark. More beautiful than the past you have been afraid to release. Maybe there is a version of your life waiting for you. Where you don't wake up wondering whether you are loved. Maybe there is a morning coming where your phone doesn't control your emotions, where a message doesn't determine whether your day is good or bad, where someone's silence doesn't make you question your value. Maybe there is a life ahead where you finally understand that peace is not something you find when another person finally chooses you. Peace is something you build when you decide to stop abandoning yourself. And I want you to think about that for a moment. How many times have you abandoned yourself just to keep someone else comfortable? How many times did you swallow your feelings because you were afraid that speaking honestly would make them leave? How many times did you pretend something didn't hurt because you were terrified that admitting it would create conflict? How many times did you accept less because you thought asking for more would make you seem difficult? Amanda, you were not difficult for wanting clarity. You were not difficult for wanting effort. Command, you were not difficult for wanting honesty. Mayanda, you were not difficult for wanting to feel secure in the heart of the person you loved. Those are not unreasonable expectations. Those are foundations. Cheng, but there comes a point where you have to stop asking someone else to give you what they have repeatedly shown they cannot give, not because they are necessarily a bad person, but because you cannot keep standing in the rain and blaming yourself for getting wet. Beandes, sometimes the answer is not to love harder. Sometimes the answer is to stop fighting for something that is fighting against you. and that doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you finally care about yourself too. Bands, because love should not be a competition between loving someone else and protecting yourself. Healthy love makes room for both. You should be able to say, I love you, and I will not accept being disrespected. You should be able to say, I want this relationship, but I also want to remain myself. You should be able to say, I am willing to work through difficult things, but I am not willing to live in permanent confusion. That is not selfish. That is self-respect. And self-respect is not loud. It doesn't always slam doors. Belina, sometimes self-respect is a quiet decision you make when nobody else knows what you are doing. You stop calling, oh. You stop chasing. You stop explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. You stop trying to make someone see your value. You simply decide that from this day forward, you will not participate in your own emotional destruction. And that decision may hurt, but there is a different kind of pain that comes from betraying yourself. Men are the pain of knowing you stayed when every part of you knew you needed to go. And the pain of looking back years later and realizing you spent your best years waiting for somebody to become ready. Menders the pain of losing yourself so slowly that you didn't even notice it happening. Mayanda, Dumbayamstino. Don't let that be your story. If you have to leave before you forget who you are. Man, if you have to stay because there is mutual effort, not because you are afraid of being alone. Man, if you have to forgive without giving someone unlimited permission to hurt you again. Linz, if you have to begin again, begin without apologizing for the fact that your heart still wants something beautiful. Men's, because beginning again is not failure. Beginning again means you are still willing to believe that life can surprise you. And life has a strange way of doing that. Blands. Sometimes the thing you thought would destroy you becomes the thing that introduces you to your strongest self. Sometimes the goodbye you thought would be the end becomes the beginning of your freedom. Many. Sometimes the person you begged to stay becomes the person you are eventually grateful walked away. Dalian, not because you stopped loving them, because you finally learned to love yourself enough to continue without them. And one day you will look back. Landa, you will remember the nights when you thought you could not survive the silence. You will remember the tears. Drend, you will remember the unanswered questions. You will remember how badly you wanted things to be different. And you will realize that you survived every single day you once thought you couldn't survive. Bon, that is your proof. You have already made it through things you thought would break you forever. Mans, you have already carried pain that you once believed was too heavy. You have already stood up after falling. Lane, so don't underestimate yourself now. The sight, and maybe the future you have been afraid to imagine is far more beautiful than the past you have been afraid to release. Yeah. And maybe the future you have been afraid to imagine is far more beautiful than the past you have been afraid to release. Maybe there is a version of your life waiting for you. Where you don't wake up wondering whether you are loved. Maybe there is a morning coming where your phone doesn't control your emotions, where a message doesn't determine whether your day is good or bad, where someone's silence doesn't make you question your value. Maybe there is a life ahead where you finally understand that peace is not something you find when another person finally chooses you. Peace is something you build when you decide to stop abandoning yourself. Oh. And I want you to think about that for a moment. How many times have you abandoned yourself just to keep someone else comfortable? Yeah. How many times did you swallow your feelings because you were afraid that speaking honestly would make them leave? How many times did you pretend something didn't hurt because you were terrified that admitting it would create conflict? How many times did you accept less because you thought asking for more would make you seem difficult? Amanda, you were not difficult for wanting clarity. You were not difficult for wanting effort. Command, you were not difficult for wanting honesty. Mayanda, you were not difficult for wanting to feel secure in the heart of the person you loved. Man, those are not unreasonable expectations. Those are foundations. Cheng, but there comes a point where you have to stop asking someone else to give you what they have repeatedly shown they cannot give, not because they are necessarily a bad person, but because you cannot keep standing in the rain and blaming yourself for getting wet. Bindes. Sometimes the answer is not to love harder. Sometimes the answer is to stop fighting for something that is fighting against you. And that doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you finally care about yourself too. Bands, because love should not be a competition between loving someone else and protecting yourself. Healthy love makes room for both. You should be able to say, I love you, and I will not accept being disrespected. You should be able to say, I want this relationship, but I also want to remain myself. You should be able to say, I am willing to work through difficult things, but I am not willing to live in permanent confusion. That is not selfish. That is self-respect. And self-respect is not loud. It doesn't always slam doors. Belina, sometimes self-respect is a quiet decision you make when nobody else knows what you are doing. You stop calling, oh. You stop chasing. You stop explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. You stop trying to make someone see your value. You simply decide that from this day forward, you will not participate in your own emotional destruction. And that decision may hurt, but there is a different kind of pain that comes from betraying yourself. Men of the pain of knowing you stayed when every part of you knew you needed to go. And the pain of looking back years later and realizing you spent your best years waiting for somebody to become ready. Menders the pain of losing yourself so slowly that you didn't even notice it happening. Mayanda, don't let that be your story. If you have to leave before you forget who you are. Man, if you have to stay because there is mutual effort, not because you are afraid of being alone. Man, if you have to forgive without giving someone unlimited permission to hurt you again. Lens, if you have to begin again, begin without apologizing for the fact that your heart still wants something beautiful. Men's, because beginning again is not failure. Beginning again means you are still willing to believe that life can surprise you. And life has a strange way of doing that. Blands. Sometimes the thing you thought would destroy you becomes the thing that introduces you to your strongest self. Sometimes the goodbye you thought would be the end becomes the beginning of your freedom. Many. Sometimes the person you begged to stay becomes the person you are eventually grateful walked away. Dalian, not because you stopped loving them, because you finally learned to love yourself enough to continue without them. And one day you will look back. Landa, you will remember the nights when you thought you could not survive the silence. You will remember the tears. Drend, you will remember the unanswered questions. You will remember how badly you wanted things to be different. And you will realize that you survived every single day you once thought you couldn't survive. Well, and that is your proof. You have already made it through things you thought would break you forever. Mans, you have already carried pain that you once believed was too heavy. You have already stood up after falling. Lane, so don't underestimate yourself now. And so if you are listening to me and your heart is telling you, I can't do this anymore, I want you to slow down. Maybe you can't do it the old way anymore. Maybe that's the point. Planger. Maybe you are not supposed to keep repeating the same cycle. Maybe you are supposed to stop chasing. Maybe you are supposed to stop begging. Maybe you are supposed to stop proving. Maybe you are supposed to stop settling. Maybe you are supposed to become brave enough to say, I deserve a love that doesn't require me to disappear. And when you say that, mean it. Lanced. Because your life will change the moment your standards become stronger than your fear of losing someone. The moment you can walk away from disrespect. The moment you can say no without feeling guilty. The moment you can accept that someone not choosing you does not make you unworthy. Mind, the moment you can look at an empty space beside you and still feel complete. Lands. That is when you become dangerous to every situation that once depended on your insecurity. Lemandus, because now you cannot be controlled by the fear of abandonment. You cannot be manipulated by the threat of someone leaving. You cannot be convinced that crumbs are a feast. You know your value, and knowing your value changes everything. Phalanges, but don't confuse knowing your value with believing you are better than everyone else. Bandit, true self-worth doesn't make you arrogant, it makes you peaceful. You don't need to prove that you are special. You simply stop accepting situations that constantly make you feel ordinary, unwanted, or invisible. You stop fighting for a seat at tables where nobody wants you. and you start building your own table. And you start creating your own life. You start becoming the person you once hoped someone else would come and save. And that is when you realize something extraordinary. You were never waiting for someone to complete you. You were waiting to remember that you were already whole. Maybe love will come again. John's, man, maybe it will come in a way you never expected. Maybe it will be someone you already know. Maybe it will be someone you haven't met yet. But maybe it will begin with a conversation that seems ordinary. Benjamin, maybe it will begin years from now. You don't know, and that's okay. Manda, you don't need to know who is coming. Mengthaus for want of ante. You only need to become ready for the life you want to live. And when that life arrives, I hope you are not still standing at the door of your past, waiting for someone who decided not to walk through it with you. Menzir, I hope you are moving forward. I hope you are laughing again. I hope you are surrounded by people who celebrate your existence. I hope you are sleeping peacefully. Lenja, I hope you wake up excited about your own life. Patep. And I hope you finally understand that the greatest love story you will ever live is not simply the story of who loved you. It is the story of how you learn to love yourself without becoming incapable of loving others. So don't leave your life because one person left it. Bayan, don't throw away your future because your past disappointed you. Mend, don't let one broken promise convince you that every promise is a lie. Don't let one goodbye become the ending of your entire story. There is still more. There is still time. There are still mornings you haven't seen. There are still conversations you haven't had. Manders, there are still places you haven't visited. There are still people you haven't met. There are still dreams waiting for you, and there is still a version of you waiting on the other side of this pain, a stronger version, a wiser version, a calmer version, a version who no longer begs to be chosen because they finally understand that being chosen by someone else is beautiful, but choosing yourself in the action. So if tonight you are standing at the edge, take one more breath, look at your life, then look at how far you have come, and instead of asking, why did they leave? Then ask yourself, where's life trying to leave you now? Maybe the answer will not come immediately. The answer will come. Maybe tomorrow will still hurt. Maybe next week will still feel uncertain, but keep walking. Okay, because sometimes the road becomes clear only after you take the first step. And Genia, and one day you will wake up and realize you are no longer waiting for the past to change. Alanded, you are building the future. You are no longer asking someone to recognize your worth. Mons, you are living like you already know it. You are no longer afraid that being alone means being forgotten. You understand that solitude can be a place where you rebuild. Alanded, you are no longer desperate to hold on to every person who enters your life. Bant, you understand that some people are meant to be loved, some are meant to be lessons, and some are meant to walk beside you for the rest of the journey. And when you finally meet the person who chooses you with clarity, consistency, and intention, you will not have to beg them to stay. You will not have to decode every message. You will not have to wonder where you stand. To MBNDSNU. You will simply know, and perhaps that is the beautiful ending you have been waiting for. Not someone returning, and Jean, not someone finally apologizing, not someone finally realizing what they lost, but you finally realizing what you gained. You gained yourself, you gained your voice, you gained your standards, you gained your courage. Valence, you gained the ability to walk away from what destroys your peace. You gain the wisdom to recognize what deserves your heart, and you gain the understanding that your story does not end where someone else stopped loving you. Your story continues. Your heart continues, your life continues, and there is still something beautiful ahead, so don't leave yet. Gingers, not because you have to stay where you are hurting. Bingers, not because you have to keep waiting for someone who won't change. Tabana, but because there is still a life waiting for you beyond this moment. Membanada Manjas, there is still a future that deserves to meet you. Bent, there is still a version of you that deserves to breathe without fear. Vance, there is still love that can be healthy, honest, patient, and real. And most importantly, there is still you. And the you who survived, the you who cried, the you who hoped. Blending you who kept going, even when nobody knew how hard it was. honor that person, protect that person. Man, believe in that person, because you have already survived the chapter you thought would destroy you. Pained. Now give yourself permission to write the next one. And when you look back someday, I hope you don't remember this season as the time your heart broke. I hope you remember it as the moment you finally stopped breaking your own heart trying to keep someone else from leaving. But man, I hope you remember it as the moment you chose peace, the moment you chose dignity, and the moment you chose healing, the moment you chose yourself. Well, and if you remember nothing else from these words, remember this: you do not have to chase what is meant to meet you halfway. You do not have to beg for what genuine love gives freely. You do not have to destroy yourself to prove that your love is real. Your love is real. Man, your heart is valuable. Your future is still waiting. And whatever happens next, walk into it with your head held high, your heart open but protected, and your spirit unwilling to settle for anything that requires you to become smaller just to be loved. Chent, because the right love will not ask you to disappear. Valence, the right love will help you become more of who you were always meant to be. And maybe that is why you needed to hear this before you left. Maybe this was never about convincing you to stay with someone. Maybe it was about convincing you to stay with yourself. So stay with your dreams. Stay with your hope. Manda, stay with your healing. Stay with the part of you that still believes tomorrow can be better. Guys, stay long enough to see what happens when you stop chasing what dot is leaving and start walking toward what is meant for you. Vanda, because your story is not over, not even close. And the chapter that broke your heart may become the chapter that taught you how to love your life again. And so take one more breath, wipe your tears if you need to, release what you cannot control. Damned is forgive what you cannot change, and take that next step, not backward, forward, ambinjana. Because somewhere ahead of you is a life you cannot see yet, a peace you have not felt yet, a love you have not experienced yet, and a version of yourself you have not met yet. Man, keep walking toward it, and when you finally arrive, you will understand why you had to let go of everything that was never willing to hold you. Man, you will understand why the goodbye hurt. You will understand why the waiting exhausted you. Vanda, you will understand why the door had to close. Man, because sometimes God, life, or destiny does not remove something from your hands to punish you. And debt, sometimes it removes it because your hands need to be free for what comes next. And when the next chapter arrives, I hope you don't enter it carrying the weight of the old one. Enter it lighter, enter it wiser, enter it grateful. Lam Mender, enter it, knowing that you are worthy of love that stays, love that communicates, love that respects, love that grows, and love that never requires you to abandon yourself. And if nobody has told you this lately, let me tell you now, you are going to be okay. Mended, not because everything will happen exactly the way you want, but because you are stronger than the uncertainty. You mended, you are stronger than the goodbye. You are stronger than the loneliness. Andy, you are stronger than the chapter you are leaving behind. And one day, you will look back at this moment and realize that the person you were, trying so desperately to save was never the only person who needed saving. Yandis, you needed you, and this time, you finally showed up. That is not the end of your story. Man, that is the beginning of your freedom, okay?